Welcome back to Your Whitest Friend. My name is Jordan LeBlanc, and I am the white friend. How white am I? Well, I've been asked on multiple occasions if my skin sparkles in the sunshine. How white am I? I am so white that I absolutely, under no circumstances, am permitted to dance. I am so white that my last name literally means the white. It's French, LeBlanc, the white. You are joining me for a conversation, a series of conversations that I am having to help bring a diverse voice to an increasingly non-diverse group of people. I am a white evangelical Christian, and there is a distinct deficit that we have in having people of color speak into our world and to help form our viewpoint, specifically when it comes to conversations on race. And so, this is a series that I felt led and called to be a part of and to be part of the solution and to, if nothing else, provide an avenue for people to listen to people of color, hear their experience, hear their hopes for us, their brothers and sisters in Christ, for how we can be better friends and better allies. So today I have a conversation with my friend, artist and hip hop performer Johnny Hugo from Orlando, Florida, and I hope that you are blessed by our conversation, and I hope that you are challenged to rethink some of your previously held beliefs on race, on white privilege, and how we can partner with our brothers and sisters in Christ to be better Christians, better brothers and sisters, better friends, and better allies. So here is my conversation with Johnny Hugo. I'll be back to wrap this up at the end. We'll see you then. Well, folks, I want to thank you for joining back in with us. I have my friend, creator, creative, experimental. He is first and foremost an artist. In fact, I have one of his prints in my office today. He is also a freestyle hip hop artist. He is a little bit of everything, but first and foremost to me, he's my friend, Jonathan Hugo Hunte. I call him Johnny Hugo. I don't know if that is your performer name or just and something that you get called. But Johnny, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Before we get into a whole lot, man, just how are you holding up these days? How are you doing?
uh, I am doing better. I'm doing very well. If anything, I would say that I'm fortunate and I'm blessed. So that's where I'm at right now.
That's fantastic. It's definitely been a challenging season before these last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's been that kind of chaos. But man, I appreciate you joining me. This has been kind of an experiment on my part, just to kind of be able to chat with friends of mine, particularly friends of color who have been part of my life, who've spoken and been influencers for me, to just share their story in a sphere that may not have heard, may not have been able to be influenced by people of color. And so I just want to maybe for a minute just give you a platform to share, just share your story, maybe a little bit of your own background. How has the issue of race been prevalent in your life? And just hear from you and learn from you for a moment.
Yeah. So I was born in October 21st, 1985. So I grew up in the 90s.
Yes.
Grew up in Queens, New York. So very diverse urban area.
Yeah.
And I come from a Christian background. So
Sure.
I grew up going to church, Sunday school, VBS, all that stuff.
Oh, yes.
So I was actually homeschooled from first grade to sixth grade.
All right.
And that was great because my mom got to take us to like the Met, and we got to see a lot of art, and we got to also do a lot of independent studies and learn about, like a lot of people that were involved in the civil rights, like Shirley Chisholm, or poets like Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks. And so I always had like an understanding that race was a thing,
Hmm.
but it's different when you're younger and you're learning about it because you
Right.
think like, well, this happened back then. You don't really experience it, especially if you
Sure.
live. I mean, like prejudice happens everywhere,
Hmm. Sure.
but if you live in a more diverse area where people are kind of represented, you don't really see it as much.
Mm.
Um, so in 2000, I went back to regular school after sixth grade, so seventh grade to
As a former homeschooler, going to regular school speaks to me. For
yeah.
those of you that were not homeschooled, like regular school, or how else did we put it? There were so many ways that my family referred to, like, this public school system. So just kind of as an out there, that is one connection point. So you went back to normal school.
I was cool with the normies. One thing I did notice was like in the history classes that the history of racism in America is kind of watered down and kind of like washed over
Okay.
as one. It wasn't really explored as much as like when I was homeschooled.
Sure.
And my mom told me like different films and books and things like that.
Right.
But then my dad's job transferred us to Orlando, Florida in 2001.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I moved from the north to the south,
Mhm.
and we lived in a town called Oviedo.
Mhm.
And Oviedo, it's in the middle of urban and rural.
Okay.
And the high school that I went to was called the Masters Academy,
Mhm.
and it was there that I realized that I was different.
Okay.
Because I will say 97% of the people that went there
Mhm.
were white. And I realized that they didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. And so they would ask me like some questions that were just kind of very bizarre, very offensive.
Sure.
People would say things, they would have microaggressions. And this isn't everybody, obviously.
No, of course not.
But I was very aware that I was Black and that I was different.
Okay.
And so having that experience, I kind of struggled with a lot of self-identity issues because some
Sure.
people would say, the same people would say things like, well, you don't sound Black, or like, you don't dress Black.
Okay.
And so that made, feel even more different. But then at the same time, they would put all these stereotypes on me. And so I'm like, well, I can't win. Like, where do I fit?
Wow.
Like, I can't, I'm just being myself. And so people are telling me, well, you sound white. But at the same time, like, oh, do you do this one thing that I saw one Black person do? So it's kind of maddening a little.
Sure.
And then I'm trying to think if I had any like instances of blatant racism happen
Sure.
to me in New York. I can't really think of any aside from like a joke that somebody would make.
Right.
Like kids, make ignorant jokes all the time.
Of course.
But I had a job working at a grocery store, at a grocery store called Albertsons.
Okay.
By the way, rest in peace to Albertsons because they're all closed.
Yeah.
And I was helping a customer, and she bought like these 12 packs of Pepsi that we had on sale. And so I was putting it under her cart, and she said, "Don't touch my groceries, N-word."
Oh, wow. And this was in New York?
No, this was here.
Okay, that was there. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so this is I was doing my job, smiling, being friendly. And I was just kind of like, wow, that's,
Right. Wow.
Like I didn't warrant this, but it didn't matter. Like I'm at my job, I'm wearing the uniform.
Right.
And then there's little things that would happen after that, and some that were big, like
Sure.
getting pulled over. And then when I'm getting my information out, the cop like unholsters their gun.
Wow.
And it's not like a one-time thing. It's every time I get pulled over.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It's always the hand right there.
Wow.
Or there's always like a condescending, is this your car? Or,
Sure.
like, do you know how fast you were going? Or it's always a talking down and a belittling. And I remember that my parents would tell me, like, just because, okay, let me go back a little bit. So when I was in high school, I wanted to look like my favorite rappers, like Nelly and Chris, and
right.
I had corner, and my parents were very upset, and not because like they disapproved of how I looked or anything, but they said you're a young black man in America, and people are going to judge you based on how you look. So you don't get the privilege of expressing yourself.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I actually realized that when one night me and my friends went to teen night at this club called Roxy.
Okay.
By the way, that that was a horrible experience.
Oh
Number
no.
one, I go with my two white friends, and so I'm there with cornrows and my Jordon headband and the whole Nelly gear, and they get in fine, and I get patted down, and I get asked, "Do you have any weapons on you?"
Wow.
So, but yeah, that's a little story about that.
Wow.
But even now, last year, I lived in a neighborhood called Castleberry, which is like the edge of Winter Springs, which is kind of like a nicer area in Central.
Sure.
And
I literally only know like Orlando, the tourist trap Orlando. And last time I was in Orlando, for anyone watching this, I was there not this past January, but the January before that, when you guys had your the show that I came to. You had that kind of improv, kind of private show with the rest of Freed Apps. Shout out to Freed Apps. And Isaac invited me to be a part of that. So it's literally outside of Tourist Trap Orlando. He gave me the address to go to, and I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea where this is or what this is. And, I was timid in there. So just so everyone knows, this is not all just Tourist Trap Orlando.
Yeah.
There's more to it.
So I lived in a condo.
Okay.
And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you. So I worked at Disney, and I would do performances, like you said. So sometimes I'd get home late.
Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that the same cop has pulled me over while I'm turning into my condo complex. A lot of nights that I would come home late.
Wow.
And he would always ask me. Well, first of all, the reason why he told me he pulled me over was because he said I stopped for there's like a red light, and then I would have to turn left.
Okay.
And so he told me that I stop at the light, but my tires were a little bit over the white line, and so that's why he was pulling me over. And this would happen like multiple times, and so I'd be like, "All right,
same cop every time. It was the same officer every time." Okay.
Yep. I would, and so every time I would turn at that light, I'd make sure that I was behind the line. But he would always make an excuse. He would say, like, just doing a routine stop, or we had some calls about a disturbance in the area, so I'm just doing a routine job. And he would pull me over. I lived across from a Walmart. He pulled me over in the same Walmart parking lot every single time.
Wow.
And this happened. I actually have a podcast that I do where I tell this story, like it happens over and over again.
Wow.
And that. The thing about that is not only is that hard enough to deal with, but it's hard enough to talk to my friends who aren't people of color, because they either think that we're exaggerating or that we're lying, or that it's always the eye roll of here we go again. But when I do talk to my friends who are people of color, they always say same thing. They have the same stories as well. It's that happened to you. This is what happened to me.
Right.
And so, I mean, these are just things that we deal with. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if you sound white or how you dress or how respectful you are. Like, it's going to happen. Sure. It keeps happening.
Well, and it's interesting. For me, you mentioned you're October 85. Is that what you said your birthday was, your birth month? I'm an April 85 baby. So, I mean, we're within 6 months of each other. And I find it fascinating just how different, in some ways we have very similar backgrounds in the homeschooling and our age, just our general demographic, even our New York connection, even though I'm in rural New York and you spent time growing up in very urban, New York City is entirely different than Plattsburgh. You've been to Plattsburgh, so that it's very different. But I'm floored by how, I mean, I've literally been stopped once in my life, and I was patently like I was going 25 over the speed limit, and I was getting pulled over. I mean, just that seems to be, or to me, it says something about the difference of experience that I've never considered it. It's never been a thought. It's a the my experience with people of authority, whether it's police or security or something else, has been voluntary
Mhm.
entirely. Whereas you, who are very much in that similar demographic, your experience has been patently different. You mentioned that there's an eye roll element from us white folk, and that's not what you said. That's I'll claim that. How can you kind of unpack that a little bit of the way that people whose experience differ from yours, why do you like, I guess maybe unpack a little bit of just the is it a distrust, do you think, of your experience, or can you attribute that to anything, or what would you attribute that reaction to, or do you have any idea?
Well, I would guess, because I can't speak for
Of
any
course.
person who's on them,
No.
but I kind of take it as it's a place of privilege.
Sure.
So, for example, like if I have two older sisters,
Mhm.
and so I've seen a lot of interactions they've had to go to. So I'm very sympathetic to the female experience.
Sure.
And so, like for example, if my sister was to say like this guy was looking at me gross, I
Right.
wouldn't roll my eyes and be like, "Oh, you're being sensitive." I would
Okay.
be like, "No, I've witnessed it because I've been there." So, I
Right.
mean, males do have privilege, and so that's
Sure.
why a lot of times when females say like, "Feel safe here," they'll be
Mhm.
like, "Oh, she's just exaggerating." And so I kind of think it's the same thing.
Okay.
Where if you've only had, like you said, you've had good instances with
Right.
the law enforcement, and so
Right.
that's what you're going to think. It's like,
Mhm.
well, I get away with it, fine,
Right.
you know. But if you were in the car with one of your minority friends and you've
Mhm.
seen it, then you'd be like, wow, this is actually real. Because I've
Right.
had friends with me. One of my friends, she was in a car with me when I got pulled over,
Sure.
and cop like left us in the car for 25 minutes, and then he came back and he actually had the same exact excuse that my tires were a little bit over the white line.
Hmm.
And it was
Wow.
like in a neighborhood over, and like, so I mean, she was already someone who was sympathetic
Sure.
to these types of issues, but when she saw it for her own eyes, she was just like
Right.
very apologetic, like, "I'm so sorry that you have to go through this, like it's not fair."
Wow.
And like, I've seen it, so if somebody
Right.
says like you're exaggerating, I can stick up for you and be like, "No, this isn't an exaggeration."
Right. Well, I think you mentioned privilege, and I think there's something to be said, when there's a lot of conversation right now surrounding white privilege. Folks in my sphere of influence tend to kind of roll their eyes at the very concept of white privilege. And I think this, if nothing else, highlights a little bit, at least to me, because when the concept of white privilege comes up, it tends to be well, I don't have it easy, and I'm
Yeah.
very white, um,
Hmm.
rather
And that's
than
saying you didn't struggle.
right.
They're just saying that ceiling that you could break through, it's
Mhm.
going to take us a lot harder.
Sure.
Like,
It at last weekend in my teaching for our church, I it wasn't in reference to this, but I feel like the quote that I came across really applies, from Alice in Wonderland. The Red Queen is talking about how you have to run just to stay in place, and if you want to get anywhere, you have to run twice as fast. And that feels like an appropriate comment on how it feels. Or let me phrase that in a question: does that feel like an appropriate type of description for how you feel, to a degree, when you, especially considering the discussion of white privilege?
yeah. And especially so, like, I came from, both my parents had careers and jobs,
Sure.
and so we never like struggled for money, and so I had that privilege,
Sure.
of being to go to a good school
Mhm.
and have food and be able to go on vacations and things
Right.
like that. But people don't look at you. They don't see me, and
Right.
they say he comes from, a place of like his parents are comfortable,
Right.
or had a good education, or he
Mhm.
went to college.
Right.
So whenever I go to apply for a job, that's not the first thing they see. The first thing they see is my
Sure.
skin.
Right.
And so I've had instances in school and in jobs,
Mhm.
um, where like the professor would, treat me differently than I would see him treat some of the other white students. And even
Sure.
some of the other white students, like we'd have, group discussions
Mhm.
about art theory or something like that.
Sure.
And they would talk about how they barely tried on their paper and got an A, whereas me and the other three people of color in the classroom
Right.
would get like little notes about, well, this is a little thin. But when our peers were telling us like,
Mm.
you actually like this is a good, like really good project, like we did the work,
Sure.
we went above and beyond. Same thing at work. It's, well, we decided to go another way for this promotion. Even though I show up early, I stay late.
Sure.
I come in when I'm not called. And I'm not saying like this happens to every single person,
Sure.
but in my experience, I've noticed it. I've noticed it happen a lot.
Right.
So
Right. And it definitely seems like when we talk about privilege, it's not like you said, it's not that everybody does. I mean, anyone I've ever met has some level of struggle. And even, we'll kind of shift a little bit here in just a moment to talking about, kind of the micro, occasions that have been happening on such a focused thing over the last few weeks with the issues with George Floyd and Minneapolis and all the seismic happenings that have been really impacting me from a distance. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of your own experience specifically with that. But I think when we talk about white privilege, it's not that there isn't a struggle. And it's not that life is easy, but by and large, I've never experienced from a systemic, from people of authority and people of positions of power, where my race limits me. Where my I was reading even, I don't know if I think it was either Latasha Morrison's Be the Bridge, or I just started Daniel Hill's book White Awake. So it was one of the two that we're talking about, like even just an African name or a vaguely ethnic sounding name
yeah,
being a barrier. And I think it's easy to assume that when people talk about white privilege, it specifically means, you have no problems, but it simply says, my problems aren't because I'm white,
exactly.
or because of my color or my ethnicity. And obviously this isn't only, for black people. Like I've talked to people of other minority races, and I know that people of color in general, I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of the reason that people of color have been used is because it incorporates a larger group of people who've experienced this level of racism and experience beyond just African Americans. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because a lot of my Hispanic friends will say the same
No doubt.
thing, or like my Indian friends.
Sure.
So yeah, if you're
Yeah.
brown, there's that barrier.
Sure. I want to talk just for a moment to see, you're an artist. You travel with Free Daps, which is freestyle hip hop. And you're a bit of a nerd. I don't know if a bit is accurate. I'm being generous here. How has your experiences both as an artist, in the world of freestyle, and I know a lot of the travel you do is with colleges, how have you seen kind of, are there unique experiences you've seen in those worlds, that you would think are unique or worth sharing, that might be different even than others? Like how have those worlds kind of impacted your experiences, especially in regard to this?
Well, I will say, so we have Free Daps is an extensive group, and we
Yes,
have people of all different shades and colors and
absolutely.
backgrounds. But I will say that, so when I'm traveling with, let's say, two of the other white guys in the group,
Right.
like maybe due to their privilege, they don't realize that going into a certain area,
Mm-hmm.
I might not feel comfortable. Because
Okay.
one time I was doing a show, I think it was with Heath and Mark, and Mark's black and Heath is
Okay.
as white as they come.
Heath
Uh,
is very white.
tell you. And so we're driving through parts of Georgia to go to the school, and we see Confederate flags on the road. And so me and Mark are both talking about like how uncomfortable we are. And then Heath is talking to us about it. And he's trying to understand.
Sure.
But I wonder like if he thinks like, oh, this is just something that's uncomfortable, or if he knows that in the back of our heads we're kind of fearful for our lives. And
sure.
like it's kind of hard to, so what we do is very fun and goofy and inclusive.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard from going through that and then thinking like, oh, I'm just going to perform now in this area where these are me not being welcome here. I actually have an example of one time we did a show upstate New York, in the state that I was born in, by
sure.
And we go to eat before doing a show. And we walk inside, and there's like a lot of bikes outside, like motorcycles. And some have Confederate flags on the bumpers in New York. So
I believe it.
We go inside, and everybody there, their heads kind of whip. So it's me, Heath, and Francisco. And Francisco's Puerto Rican. And so everybody's heads whip and look at us. And then one of the workers comes over. He goes, guys, I'm just going to be honest. It's not going to be a short wait. In my kitchen for you guys, it's going to be at least an hour. And so we look around, and it's not that busy. And then we walk out. And so even Heath was like, Heath was like, yeah, I know what that's about. Like I know what this is. And so then we had to go do a show like right after. And a lot of the times people of color are told, even if it's not said like explicitly, to kind of just suck it up and deal with it. But they don't know like the mental trauma that comes with it. They don't know how I feel when I go home, or how it's something that I always have to doubt. Like you said, I'm an artist and I'm a nerd. So if I do a piece of art, I have to wonder, like, am I not good? Is that why I'm not getting the attention that I feel that if somebody who was white created this would get? Or is it that I'm not good enough? And so I have to constantly keep, trying to get better and trying to promote myself differently, because in my head, I don't want that to be the excuse. I want it to be, I made it here because I'm talented. And then now recently people have been hitting me up and saying things like, your art is so talented. I'm so great. I want to work with you. And so now that's messing with me even more. Am I thinking, so was I good all along and now they're finally seeing it? Or do they feel guilty and now they're trying to give me a platform? Because of all that's going on. So,
one of the things I've been really promoting or challenging people here in upstate New York, obviously we're way upstate, but that reminder that this is not a southern or urban issue, that this is not an issue that we can just pretend like it's out there somewhere else. And when I did my kind of first, I guess, foray into publicly addressing the issue of race a couple Sundays ago now, I think, where I shared two people that I know personally in my county who have experienced that. Just that reminder again, and I'm not going to ask where this was because I don't think that's important, but just that reminder of just for people that are watching this from New York, upstate New York, just that reminder of this isn't a deep South thing, that we can talk about Georgia and we can talk about, the whatever stereotypical deep South you want to think about. But just that reminder that this is not a foreign or an issue of far away. And I think that's so it's so important that we keep that in mind, that this is not an out there thing, and just kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you might be tempted to suggest, well, I'm not, it can't be part of the problem because we're because we're a small town, or I know all of the people in this region and they're great people. Because unfortunately I see Confederate flags around here, which is a bit mind boggling. It's a bit, it is definitely a bit, yeah, it's a bit, I don't understand it just from a even a patriotic level of like, I've never understood um the cheering for the guys that lost, or cheering for the people that said, we're not going to be American anymore. They used to call those traitors, but I might open a whole a whole can of worms.
I had some friends in high school that would have their cell phone cases be the Confederate flag, or they'd wear it on the belt,
mm,
and they say things like, "Well, it means Southern pride." And
right.
I'm like, "Well, I mean, it's the pride in something that lost."
Right. Right. And I get being proud of where you came from, which aw, um I get being proud of where you came from. I'm Canadian. I'm intensely proud of where I came from. But that I I I would hope that, if my flag or a flag from Canada represented some of the more genocidal, or racist, things that we've had in our past, which we're still very much dealing with.
Yeah,
Um, I would hope that that would not be an icon that I would use, to celebrate, um, to celebrate my heritage. Thankfully, as far as I'm aware, the Canadian flag with its maple leaf is largely, a symbolic of nothing besides our love of maple syrup. But it's
yeah,
it's certainly, I think, it's so vitally important that we don't forget, um, that this is not just a Southerner thing, but that we need to start keeping, keeping ourselves, aware, of how this is a reality in our own backyards.
yeah.
And that's incredibly important. um let's let's talk briefly, and I know this has been a very emotional couple of weeks, but I just because I think it's important that we have a conversation about, the impact that you have felt, even just personally, about, obviously George Floyd is a catalyst in that sense. I mean, he's a person created in the image of God, and by all accounts that I can find, all reliable accounts, was not just a made in the image of God, but somebody that loved Jesus. Um, but tragically, frustratingly, infuriatingly, is not the first, but and not even the last, in the sense of there have been since. Um, and I know, Breonna Taylor is another name that is in some circles is being threatened to be drowned out. But
Yeah.
so many have come before, and as much as it sickens me to know this and to admit this, I know that there will be many names I expect to be added. Um, so maybe, I mean, we can talk about George, we can talk about Brianna, but I just, how has this impacted you personally? Not that I want to be that millennial that makes everything about us, but at the same time, how have you responded? What has the impact been on you personally? And kind of what has the results been, over these last couple of weeks from your experience?
Um. Well, first it impacted me because like it's exhausting to see just in general, like
Of
sad.
course.
But when you look like the people that you see suffering,
Right.
and there's kind of no excuse,
No.
like people would love to dig into their past and find
Mm.
everything they did that was wrong in their entire life, but that
Right.
doesn't justify someone being crushed to death on camera
No.
in broad daylight.
No.
I don't care what he did before or what he, like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
He's
Or
a
even
human
what
being.
even if it was in a world where I've said, even if he was high, because I know there was people have put out there, oh well, he was high on meth, which I don't think was accurate. I think that's just, you talk about the racial, the assumption that he must have been intoxicated. And even if he was guilty of, even if it was a forged $20 bill, neither of which are capital crimes, and none of which, even if they were, deserve 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a knee in your neck.
Yeah.
So I apologize. Continue.
No, that's fine. But it's just, so it's it was disheartening to see that at first, and then see people come out in support of, even if they had a post that said like, this is awful, but that should be the full stop. This is awful.
Right.
Because when the but comes, it's kind of trying to soften the blow and say like, well, this happened because of this. Like, it's almost giving an excuse to murder. But what really got me was, if you've seen me on social media, I like to ride my bike a lot.
Yes.
How I stay healthy. It's how I keep it's how I stay mentally sane. I like being out there. Yeah, I like pedaling. I like exercising. And I go for like 30 miles. I can go all day.
Wow, yeah.
But after seeing this happen in front of us, having my mom or my sisters text me like, please don't go ride your bike today. Like, I want to know you made it home alive. Every time I'd leave the house, like, my mom would cry, like, where are you going? Why are you doing this? After hearing about Breonna Taylor, I would wake up in the middle of the night having panic attacks, wondering if one of my two sisters was having their homes broken into.
Wow.
And being shot. Because, like, where are people of color safe? We can't be safe in our cars at a routine traffic stop. We can't be safe going to the grocery store. We can't be safe. It doesn't matter, legal or illegal or anywhere in between, including in our own homes.
Wow.
If we're not safe there, then we're not safe anywhere.
Wow.
So that's been a lot. And yes, like, I have had moments where I'm fearful of my life, and that would kind of turn me from leaving the house. But I also feel like this has kind of woken me up and activated me to try to, whatever I can do to kind of spread the truth about what's going on, to whether it's, marching, peacefully protesting, giving people resources on how to end or quell systemic racism, how to have these conversations. And I'll be honest, a lot of times I've had some back and forth that I'm not proud of, because I've been emotions. But I think that these conversations are important to have.
Absolutely.
But you should have a level head, and then also to step away from it, because if you keep giving into the negativity, it's going to tear you down.
Right.
There's been so many emotions. I've been happy. I've been sad. I've been very sad. I've been angry. I've been hurt. I felt rejected. I felt accepted. There's just a whole lot of emotions just swirling around.
Wow. Do you mentioned about anger, and there's been a lot of discussion about anger lately, and I heard it, and I can't remember the source, so I apologize, but I think it was Latasha Morrison that said that as a Black woman, she felt that she was basically told she should not or could not be angry, and that anger was an emotion that a Black person should not feel. Have you felt any attempts at forcing guilt on you for your reactions to this?
Not really, not from my circle, at least.
Good.
But I have seen other people on my friends list, like specifically Black women or women of color. They've been chastised for feeling angry or for being too woke and spreading information. But I mean, if you think about it, like, why wouldn't a Black woman be angry?
Right. Of course.
So
I mean, it's yeah, that's absolutely regardless of your experience, I can't really understand how you can look at what goes on around us and not at least feel a form of righteous anger.
Yeah.
You know, at the demonstration that I was at on Saturday, there was a couple of shirts and signs that said, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And while I understand, you know, the Bible does address, and I do actually want to talk here briefly just about the impact on your faith that you've had, kind of in a macro and micro sense. But I know the Bible talks about, you know, not being angry and to instead be people of peace. But I think there's the false assumption that anger just magically disappears rather than you know, it's, to me at least, it tends to be more of a matter of what controls you, not experiencing the emotion or the reaction of anger. Because if that's true, then Jesus was wrong when he cleared the temple. Not just cleared the temple, but when he formed a whip, when he
Yeah.
took cords and fashioned a whip. Which is one of my favorite exegetical pieces to say. Not only was Jesus angry, but I believe it's the passage from Mark that says he fashioned a whip out of cords, and that's my Jesus. I mean, how many times we don't like to talk about a lot of Old Testament references to God and his wrath, but largely when you look at Isaiah 1, when you look at Amos 5, those are two passages I've been repeatedly referencing. God's anger specifically is at his people not being committed to justice, not being committed to seeking justice for those who are oppressed, not speaking out as advocates for the defenseless, not protecting those who need protection. And it is specifically, my wrath burns against you. So as an aside there for a discussion on anger, I think there is a very healthy place, because I've been angry. I've been very emotional because I'm hearing, and I realize it maybe shouldn't have to get to the point where you hear stories. I mean, you know, from your stories and others of friends of mine and people that I've just been meeting over the last couple of weeks who've shared their experiences. I mean, maybe it shouldn't have to get so deeply personal, but I think the righteous anger that I have felt has bubbled up because I see this in your eyes. And, you know, talking to you know, our friend Elijah and hearing his, you know, he's an 85 baby too. And so, you know, we're literally the same age, and he lives in New York as well. And so, you know, just my level of anger has been, in some cases, I think, higher, because I get from a lot of people that they're just tired, and I'm not tired because this hasn't been my fight, but it is now. Like, it is now. And so I'm just angry. I'm not tired because it just started. But it's so you did end up taking part in the demonstration, or at least in a demonstration in Orlando, correct?
Yeah, in a couple.
Okay, so what has that been? What is your experience in the Orlando protests been?
100% peaceful.
Great.
100% unity, community, love, and well organized by young, passionate people. Good. And like we said, we're 85 babies, so the knees ain't what they used to be. Through these streets, you know, it wears on you. But what I've seen is a group of young, passionate people willing to take the time to educate other people. It's not just about marching and holding up a sign,
of course,
and it's like I've seen people give resources and tell personal stories
Mhm.
and talk about how you can enact change and talk about the injustices they've witnessed, that
Right.
they've seen,
Mhm.
why people are allies, what we can do. I mean, there was one chant where we kept saying, "We are peaceful, we are peaceful."
Ah.
Um, and if there was maybe one person I saw who's
Mhm.
actually a white guy, and he was trying to like antagonize the cops, and I
Ah.
immediately saw a group of people put themselves between him and the cops and say, "That's not why we're here.
Awesome.
Like our cause is bigger than that."
Yeah.
And one of the organizers who, he's black, and I say this because to a lot of people who in the neighborhood, it's a neighborhood called Winter Park, which is
Mhm.
like very ritzy and upscale.
Right.
People are eating brunch outside on the patio, and like, what the heck is happening? He's a young black man who had like twists in his hair,
Mhm.
and a lot of people would see him as like the scary black man.
Okay.
He at the very end he said like, "I don't know all of you, but I love all of you,
Ah.
and remember to be peaceful, and thank you so."
Mm.
And I always wonder, like, the people who would label him as a scary black man, how many
Mm.
of them would actually take time to get to know him
Right.
and to get to know all the things that he could offer.
Mm.
You know, how passionate he was, how artistic he was,
Right.
how creative he was, how generous and caring he was. All
Wow.
they see is his exterior. They don't see his heart.
Wow.
And so that really breaks my heart to know that there's so many people out there,
Mm.
just because of what they look like, their
Wow.
stories won't ever get to be shared the way they should.
Mm. Absolutely, man. It's that's tragic. I mentioned earlier how maybe it's a two part. Has What has been the impact on your faith? You mentioned that you grew up in churches. We've had spiritual conversations in the past. Has this had an impact on your faith? And if so, what has that been like?
That's a well, okay, so I will tell you what I've seen from
Hmm.
some people on social media initially
Hmm.
that claim to be followers of Christ.
Sure.
It really disappointed me.
Hmm.
And I don't want to like bring politics into
Of
this,
course.
but you'd see them double down on their stances,
Sure.
um, and kind of excusing it and kind of not calling things out.
Right.
And so that kind of like hit me really hard in my heart. But then I thought about, was it Matthew 7:4 talks about the plank out of your own eye?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So then I had to remind myself, like, it'd be easy to just war with these people back and forth, but
Sure.
I want to examine myself and make sure that my heart is in the right place.
Hmm.
So initially, it made me angry, it made
Hmm.
me sad. But what actually has been encouraging is seeing the people who do profess their faith and who
Hmm.
do profess to, accept Jesus as their savior and follow,
Hmm.
who want to live like Christ,
Right.
stand and posting passages of scripture that are positive
Right.
and that are, like the Jesus leaving the 99 sheep to go save the one.
Right.
People that are saying, Jesus would have said Black Lives Matter. Yeah, so that's been encouraging to see people who claim to follow Christ
Mm.
actually look like Christ.
Right.
Um, I explained to a friend of mine that whenever I see, someone who says they love me and they care about me, maybe someone who's white
Hmm.
and who supports the agenda,
Hmm.
when they tell me like they love me, but then you see them supporting something that's contradictory,
Hmm.
it kind of feels like I'm a child with two
Right.
parents and I'm being abused by one of my parents, and the other one of my parents is saying it's okay.
Oh, wow.
Like that's what that feels like.
Wow. Wow. Um, that's, I mean, that's heartbreaking, man. And I know one thing I've been trying to do is to help people actually in part um, understand how, especially in a social media age, it's so easy to share. Um, I don't know if you saw, I think it was yesterday, I shared that I'm not going to give a shout out to any of the names, but I know there are some narratives that are going around that appear to be antithetical to the conversation. And they are from Black voices. but they are divergent from the experience of so many people that it feels like they're in the significant minority. But they tend to conform to white and conservative talking points,
Mm.
which I've been trying to help people see that, that we need to be better at, we need to be better at parsing these kind of things and not just seeking what reinforce our already held beliefs, and we like to relieve the tension, and sometimes the tension is good. And I think
Mm-hmm.
in my experience with particularly white Christians, we want to, in part, we want to have our guilt alleviated. And in part, we just don't like the tension.
Yeah.
And if anything, that to me just feels like another example of our own privilege, because we have the privilege of relieving the tension. So what would you say? Because this, I think, really leads us into kind of my final, I guess, formal question is what would be a way or ways that white Christians or white folks could be better friends and allies to our black and brown, our minority or people of color, that are in our world? How would you, what would be an encouraging thing for you, to see from people that look more like me?
I think the first thing would be to be willing to have the conversation without having, your clapbacks or your prepared statements to say, I understand you're saying this, but here is what I think about it.
Sure.
Because they're not listening.
Okay.
Like
sure.
you're only listening to help out your agenda.
Okay.
So before, it's kind of like you're on the defense,
right,
before the person even gets their point across. I think that's the first part, is to listen.
Yeah.
And have the conversation. I think another thing would be to admit when things are wrong. Because a lot of the times you think that there's, that, well, if I admit to this, then that kind of ruins the whole narrative for this.
Okay.
As opposed to just saying you're right about this. I'm totally agree that this thing that I once supported or that I once stood by, maybe I was wrong.
Right.
I mean, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So I think, that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. No doubt.
And also, if you're someone who is a white Christian, I think it's necessary to have black people and people of color in your life. If you have to ask yourself, if you can count I get it. Depending on where you live, not have access to hang out with to diversity.
Right.
But if you live in a place like Orlando, Florida, or New York, or anywhere where there's a good mix of different and cultures, you have no excuse to not have people of color in your life. We all learn things from each other.
Right.
And the more experiences that you hear, it'll kind of give you'll kind of have a better sense of empathy and understand to these things.
Sure.
So if you say, but my black friend said, your response should be, but my black friends said.
So no, even down to don't just seek out to borrow the term, your token black friend or your token person of color, because if you have a plurality of voices, it's not tokenism anymore. Would that be accurate?
Exactly. And like you said, I'm just one of many, so I'm glad to share my experience. I'm sure that if you talk to any black person or person of color in America, you would get very similar stories. There'd be a lot of parallels. There'd be some differences. Maybe some black people were treated harsher than I have, or some had it more lenient. And by the way, I haven't shared all my stories.
Of course.
If I get them out, we'd be here for a while.
Yeah.
But just to have, you'd have multiple examples of your friends who are people of color telling you what they go through and the experiences they have.
Right.
And the more time you spend with them, the more
Mm.
times you'll see, how they could feel uncomfortable in the situation or how they've been treated unjustly.
Right. Well, and I've even challenged, like, even in Plattsburgh, which is a small area, and once you leave the city, it gets rural pretty quickly. Even here, it's there is diversity if you look for it. But then I think it just becomes more even more important for us to seek um influences, even if it's through media or social media. I've been diving into much more Black voices, and hearing both from a spiritual and just an experiential, because that was, in my mind, that was the first thing that I could do. Like, I started intentionally reaching out to my friends of color, both locally and abroad, but also wanting to get that plurality of voices that aren't particularly. I have a very white circle of influence. I do. So that's where, I mean, the first book I read on racial reconciliation was from a Black woman, because I knew, like, there are a lot of white guys that write about it. But I've wanted to listen to, I want to make sure that I'm being intentional, not just on race, because I think that would be almost another area of tokenism. Because if I only am listening to people of color talk about race, I'm missing a whole giant giant sphere of influence that I can learn from. But all that to say, even if you can legitimately use a lack of diversity as an excuse, that doesn't mean that you can that you're excused from allowing a plurality of Black voices to speak into you. Any other tips or tricks that you'd like to throw out there for us? I'm all ears, man.
Um, I mean, just know that, like, the people of color in your life and the Black people, like you. I mean, there
Mhm.
are a lot of things we know,
Sure.
but we are hurt,
Mm.
and we a lot of times I think when people see people of color, they always think that, like, we are kind of maybe built differently.
Mm.
Like I said earlier, like, if something like I got pulled over and I told a friend, they would expect it to just roll off my back, but
Right.
like, I have emotions, and these are things that weigh on me as well.
No doubt.
And so if you have a person of color or a Black person in your life that is not okay, like,
Mm.
maybe give them a second to not be okay.
Mm. Wow.
They, like, I was an education major once upon a time,
Mhm.
and I learned that there's different teaching styles.
Sure.
Students, because not every student's going to respond the same way. Some are visual, some are auditory,
Sure.
some are hands-on. And so, it's the same thing with human beings,
Mm.
people of color. Like, we're
Right.
all going to respond to things differently. So it's not just like a one-stop fix for to
Yeah.
end racism and to end the divide. There's going to be a lot of different experiences and a lot of different emotions.
Mm. Absolutely. Gosh, that's such an important, like, giving margin for a reaction, because I think you're right. We do have the expectation. Well, the expectation that you jump right to forgiveness. And while
Mhm.
I am, as a Christian, and as a pastor, I triumph forgiveness. I preach on that perhaps more than any other topic. Um, there seems to be a level where you are there is an expectation placed on you to require forgiveness, where that's not really a biblical concept. Like, I am required to forgive you, but to require forgiveness of somebody else is a dangerous game.
Mhm.
And so, rather than jumping right to, well, I mean, you need to forgive me, or you need to forgive X, Y, and Z, um, kind of giving the opportunity to respond and react is so important.
Yeah.
is so important. Well, Johnny, I want to be very respectful of your time. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I'm going to cut this part out, but I'll just do kind of an outro, and I want to just give you a chance to give a shout out to what you're doing, and then I'd like to just talk after the recording part. Johnny, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. Johnny, thank you so much for joining us. I want to just give you a second to give a shout out to where can we follow you? Where can we find you? How can we be supporting you? Take it away. The red carpet is rolled out for you.
All right. So you can follow me on Instagram at Broken Gumball Machine. And my website is www.brokengumballmachine.com. I have some merch for sale. Or on Twitter at Free Gumballs. And you can probably see me around Orlando probably in the next couple of weeks. Still getting out there, representing the people and trying to fight injustice, or, in my room trying to do the same thing.
Exactly. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for taking the time today. I love you. I'm praying for you, man. And I hope that this is cathartic for you to share your story, and I hope to be a better friend and ally to you, and to all of my friends in the Black community. So thank you again for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. Thank you again to Johnny Hugo for being a part of this conversation. If you are watching this and you would like to share your experiences, your story, if you would like to share your story, if you are watching this and you would like to share your story, your experience with issues of race, issues of color, issues of racism and diversity, please let me know. This will be a series that will go as long or as short as I have conversations to have. So I have no set end point. So I would love to have you be a part of this conversation. But until next time, my name is Jordan. I am your whitest friend, and I will see you around.